Hey guys, Yips here, coming at you with another video, and today I want to talk about how Blizzard has been ruining the DPS rotation of classes as we've moved forward throughout the World of Warcraft expansions. Um, this is an extremely important topic to talk about because I feel like it will really hurt people who have a vested interest in this game on being creative on boss fights, on wanting to min-max their classes and being able to differentiate themselves from other players who play the same class. So yeah, let's just jump into it. So what has Blizzard been doing that's been causing this, right? And basically what Blizzard has been doing is they've been removing things that affect other things. Now that's a very vague statement. I'm going to go into more depth about what that means, but basically, they've removed things like snapshotting. They removed things like knowing the internal cooldown proc of a trinket. They removed things like, for Affliction, they removed the artifact weapon. They removed, the effectiveness of Surrender to Madness. They've removed, passively being able to drain shards from targets. They've removed the ability for Fury Warriors to use all their cooldowns at the same time. They've removed all of these ways that we can crazy modify our class. And doing that really hurts player creativity and drastically lowers player skill. Okay? And I'm going to talk about why that is. So if we think about the extreme cases, so the extreme cases would be like Surrender to Madness and Snapshotting. Now, you can argue that they are bad for the game, but what you cannot argue is that the fact that they drastically increased player skill. Players who were able to manage Snapshotting well, and players that were able to do amazing Surrender to Madnesses, were going to have a much higher potential than players who were not good at doing those things. Now, it doesn't matter if they're good for the game, not good for the game, whatever. They add a certain level of creativity and skill into the class. Okay, that's just what they do. Now, when you remove those, you can add other stuff to kind of compensate for that, and that's fine and all. But if we specifically look at Warlock moving from Legion into Battle for Azeroth, pretty much everything's gone, and you could literally write a cast sequence macro to play Affliction in the new expansion. Like you could actually write a cast sequence macro. You could write a macro that puts your dots on, cast Shadow Bolt, puts unstable afflictions on at the right time, and cast Death Bolt. You could actually write a cast sequence macro that would probably do exceptionally close DPS to someone who was manually pressing their buttons. Like exceptionally close. If you look at like the Demon Hunter, sims, and if you look at, a cast sequence macro sim versus a regular Demon Hunter sim, they're literally within like 0.5% of each other, right? And that is not a good thing. It's not a good thing when your DPS rotation can be written out as a cast sequence macro on most fights. Like, that is just ultimate robotic DPS rotations. And, this has been happening because Blizzard has been removing the ability for you as a player to affect your baseline damage. Like, so if you think of Affliction, right, or you think of Warlock in general, even Destro, Destro's baseline, you have Chaos Bolt, Incinerate, Immolate, Conflagrate, and then you have things that modify that. So like in Legion, you had portals, you had your cooldowns, you had your legendaries, all these sort of things that work together to affect Destro damage that you could use to separate you from somewhere else. Good portal usage, good use of your cooldowns at given moments, good use of whatever, and you could separate yourself from other warlocks. So if we look at the extreme case, and I'm not saying extreme cases are a good thing. I don't think Affliction and Legion was a well-designed class, right? Obviously, it was scaled out of control. Blizzard did not... I don't think they intended for it to happen, but just the way that it worked out with the artifact weapon, Affliction ended up being just this disaster for developers, and it ended up being just this crazy overpowered class because of all the modifiers that we had. But that also made the skill gap of the class extremely high in some scenarios. If we take the extreme case like, Portal Keeper, and we were to look, on Portal Keeper as a Warlock, I was consistently able to do 3 million DPS on Portal Keeper because I knew how to affect my class given my toolkit. Now, not every Warlock was able to do 3 million DPS on Portal Keeper. A lot of Warlocks were able to do extremely well, but the better you knew how to abuse your class on fights like this, the better DPS you would do. So just looking at a fight, obviously the idea is to maximize your Unstable Affliction casts at optimal moments, as well as proccing Safus and doing all of that good stuff. But being able to do it really well would differentiate from someone who wasn't able to do it well. So for example, if you did take a Warlock on Portal Keeper that literally just single targeted, and then you were to take a Warlock that, maximized his modifiers as well as single targeted, you would see a huge difference in terms of DPS between those classes. Now, if we, I know this is not like the best comparison, but if we were to look at Portal Keeper in Battle for Azeroth, let's look at the damage numbers, okay? So Portal Keeper in Battle for Azeroth. You know, the max here is 7.4k, the max here is, you know, 6.5k. Let's compare that with a single target boss fight like Garathi. Literally pretty much the same numbers, right? Like, Portal Keeper has basically turned into a single target boss fight because we've lost these abilities that allow our class to be affected with the environment around us, okay? Now, again, I'm not saying that it's, you know, necessary for the classes to have as big of a toolkit that Affliction did in Legion. What I am saying is that having a toolkit in general makes it so that your DPS is more than just this base rotation, this based cast sequence macro, right? Like, it's more than that. If we were to compare, right? Like, look at Portal Keeper. Most Portal Keeper logs here on Mythic from before pre-patch with empowered artifacts. I mean, just look at the Warlocks, right? Like, look at their damage. It's crazy. It's crazy. Warlocks are able to do just crazy, crazy numbers. And then if we were to look, you know, at Garathi, it's just not even close. Right? And that's because, I mean, I guess it's not good to look at empowered artifacts. Let's look at normal artifacts so it's, you know, more of a standard. So here's Garathi, right? You know, 2.7 million was the top. And if we look at Portal Keeper, right, you know, 3.4 million was the top. It's a huge difference going from, you know, now into Battle for Azeroth. And, you know, I understand this is an extreme scenario, but literally every single fight for a Warlock in Battle for Azeroth is going to turn into a cast sequence for Affliction. And what that means is player skill is going to come down to how well can you do that base rotation, how many shadow bolts can you fit in, how many of this. And I mean, yes, there's a certain amount of skill involved to that, right? There's a certain amount of skill in how consistent you can be with that base rotation, but in my opinion, it's much more interesting to look at the creative moments on boss fights that happen, to look at how that affects the Warlock class as a whole. And then, you know, the base rotation is part of it, but not all of it, right? And I really feel like Blizzard is screwing up. You know, you can look at almost all classes in the past and see how this has been a case. I could go on a huge rant of Feral Druid in PvP. I used to be a multi-rank 1 PvPer back in the day. I got rank 1 countless times. Like, have like 13 Glad rank 1 titles or whatever. I could go on for days about how Blizzard has ruined that class for me because of the lack of creativity it now offers. And I'm not saying that, you know, there isn't a skill set involved in being able to do a baseline rotation. What I'm saying is it's not as interesting. And hopefully Blizzard realizes this. Hopefully they give classes a better toolkit in which to optimize themselves in scenarios, because right now, the way that it looks as we move forward in expansions is it just looks like all DPSs are just going to be like, you have your baseline core of damage, and then, like, once every Bloodlust, your damage goes up a little bit because, you know, it's Bloodlust. And then, you know, that's it, right? It's awful. So let me know what you guys think. This has been a little bit of a, you know, bobbly rant. I'm kind of upset about the way that the game is, you know, kind of turning in that sense, and it's been going on for a long time. So yeah, let me know what you guys think. Let me know how you feel about it. I'm still, you know, looking forward to the new content in Battle for Azeroth, but I think the replayability on boss fights is going to be drastically reduced because it's just going to be boring, because it's just going to be like, hey, let's go in and do some single target or whatever, right? So anyway, let me know what you guys think. Thanks for watching. I'm done ranting. Have a good day.